When I was young, my parents would take me to Blockbuster to rent a video game. Renting a video game. I feel like that term is almost alien to a lot of young people today. But back in the mid-90s to early 2000s, you'd walk into Blockbuster, pick any game you want off the shelf, and rent it for 6 to 7 days. 3 days for newer titles, and this to me was considered fun. I'd sometimes rent the same N64 game every weekend. Games like Fighting Force 64, Destruction Derby 64, GoldenEye, The Ocarina of Time, all of these games come to mind. I'd bring the game home, play it over the weekend, bring it back the following week, and just repeat the same thing the following weekend. I didn't even have a way to save my game. I was a kid. When I was little, I didn't care about save games or progress or anything like that. I just liked picking up a game and playing it. It sounds monotonous and repetitive, and my god it was, but I loved doing that. I even remember saving up my allowance money for weeks just to buy the monthly PlayStation magazine. They always had these demo discs that were included at the back of it. I would bring those discs home and play those demos over and over and over again because I love trying new games and getting lost in these worlds. It sounds crazy to me now, but back then, I loved it. Fast forward to today, and I feel like it's such a struggle to find a game to get into. You think with things like Steam, with a massive library of games at your fingertips, or services that offer you extremely deep discounted game bundles like Humble Bundle or Fanatical, it would make it easier to find games to enjoy. But even with all these great services, I still find myself struggling to find a game that intrigues me. But why is this? Is it that games today just aren't the same as they were 20 years ago? Can it simply be that I've gotten older and I've grown out of that excitement phase of gaming? Or perhaps it's something else altogether? Well, with this video, I hope to find the root of that problem. Let's start with the most obvious of these. It's not me, it's video games that's changed theory. There's no denying that just 25 years ago, it was a much more simple time for video games. There was no season passes, no pre-order bonuses, no microtransactions. You paid a price and you got a full game. That was it. On top of that, games back then were just made differently. I mean, they were made by people who actually had a passion for making video games and who were fueled with creativity. Today, most AAA games are made by corporations. Corporations that care less about innovation and trying something new, and more about their profits and how much money they can make by doing as little work as possible. That's not to say that there's no passionate people in the industry, but companies like EA and Ubisoft have somewhat created a formula for making a video game. I like to call it the playing it safe formula, a formula that's been proved and tested before that's almost guaranteed to generate revenue, yet lacks no innovation and brings nothing new to the table. This may not 100% be a bad thing, but it definitely goes to show that video games today are made with a lot of other things in mind. It's why you see so many game companies starting to have season passes now. Because developers are trying to make all of their yearly revenue off of one IP instead of multiple. Once they catch success with a good one, they just milk it for as long as they possibly can, and that's really part of the problem. On top of that, let's not forget that early access is also a thing. Could you imagine if 20 years ago someone told you that for a price you can play an incomplete game? People would laugh you out of the room. Sure, there are plenty of great early access games out there on the market, but how many early access titles exist that have just been sitting in limbo for years after they've already collected money from the customer? So have video game companies changed for the worse over the years? In some ways, they have. You could definitely say that video game companies, for the most part, have shifted their focus from creating great iconic games to focusing more on increasing revenue streams, but it's also important to consider the evolution of video games as a whole as well. When video games first appeared on the scene, they were simple and primitive by today's standards. They were played on rudimentary devices like the Atari 2600 or the Commodore 64, and they often involved simple gameplay mechanics like shooting at enemies or avoiding obstacles. These games were fun in their own way, but they were also limited by the technology of the time. As the years went by, technology advanced and video games became more complex, more sophisticated. With the advent of 3D graphics and more powerful hardware, developers were able to create games that were more immersive and realistic. But with this complexity came a lot of challenges for developers. They had to balance the desire to push the boundaries of what was possible with the need to keep the gameplay accessible but yet also enjoyable. With all these new innovations and new technologies also came new problems. Games that were made just 25 years ago didn't have the same complexity of the games that we have today. Today, games are held to a much higher standard than they used to. We no longer judge a game based off of just gameplay or how fun it is anymore. We scrutinize games for their graphics, their sound design, their storyline and writing, their acting, even how glitchy or buggy the game is. Couple all of this with the fact that game companies have tight budgets and holiday deadlines to maximize sales, and it's no surprise that we have unfinished, buggy day one releases.
Run! Woo!
But perhaps it is us that are changing and not our games. As we get older, our interests change. We have more responsibilities, more commitments. As a kid, my biggest problem was trying to finish my homework, and my biggest commitment was showing up for that raid in World of Warcraft after school. Today, I hardly have the time to enjoy the things I loved doing every single day as a kid. These days, when I finally find the time to sit down and play a game, I almost feel overwhelmed. A huge open world 80+ hour game seems almost like a burden, a daunting task that's scary to even start. Do I find the motivation to begin this endeavor? Or do I simply just jump into a quick online game with my friends because, after all, I don't know the next time we're all going to be free to play together? And as I get older, I find myself slipping further and further down that path. The kid in me wants to play long, story-rich RPG adventure games, but the adult in me is telling me, no. I just don't feel like doing that right now. I only have an hour of free time, so I might as well make it something quick. I'm sure we've all been guilty of this before, at least one time or another, but sometimes I find myself browsing Steam, adding games to my list of games to play, more than actually playing the games that are on my list. I'm even guilty of this with Netflix. I'll browse Netflix's catalog more than watching anything on the platform. So it comes down to this. Do I have enough time to play the games I want to play? Am I getting older and my interests in games are changing? Are video games getting worse? Are video games getting better? Honestly, there's a lot of questions here, but what it boils down to is this. I think everything can be true at once. Am I getting old? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean I can't still enjoy new video games when they come out. Video games will always have a special place in my heart. Nostalgia aside, video games give me a source of entertainment, and they distracted me from times of depression in my mundane life. Yes, video games today face new problems that didn't exist 20 years ago. And yes, there does seem to be a general sense of laziness and stagnation from the video game developers today. But on the other hand, you could also argue that video games and the video game industry as a whole is better than it ever has been. When I think about where we first started to where we are now, it truly is a milestone, despite the negatives, and I can't help but think about the future of gaming and where it possibly can go next. Thanks for watching, guys. That is the video. I hope you guys liked it. Please leave a comment down below. Please like, please subscribe. Let me know what you guys think about this whole thing about growing up with video games. Are we getting older? Are video games changing? Is it a mix of everything? I'd really like to know your guys' comments on that and see if there's other insight in there. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.